Hey, thanks for stopping by. I'm WBFO News Director Dave Debo. We're talking tonight about mental health, specifically the new back to school normal. This is the latest in our series, part of the Mental Health Initiative at WBFO. We've got support from the Patrick P. Lee Foundation. Online, there are some earlier shows about elementary and middle school. Then last week, it was high school students. Tonight, let's dig into what that normal looks like for college students. Is there really such a thing as normal? What kind of crises do they end up facing? And what can we all do about it? If along the way you have any questions or concerns, you can type them right into the comments side of YouTube and we will ask your questions on the air. But in the meantime, we've got a lot of information to come from a pretty good panel here. So let's dig right in. Jean-Michel Jr. is here. He's a third-year law student. Before attending Barry University, he received his bachelor's at SUNY Buffalo State. Eileen Nyland is here. She's a licensed mental health counselor. She's the director of the Counseling Center at Canisius College. And Sarah Young is here. Sarah came to Buffalo State back in 2015. She's been the dean of students there since 2017. She's also the manager of their care team. As we describe all this and talk more about this, we will be looking at what a care team is. We will be looking at what kind of problems students are facing. And I figured, Jean-Michel, you'd be the perfect person to maybe kick it off. You're obviously the student here. What have you seen, if not specifically with yourself, with colleagues and students around you? How difficult has it been for the people you bump into on campus to deal with whatever the heck this new normal of post-COVID is?
I know personally for me, the biggest issue was just knowing people in general. Coming back on campus, I haven't been on campus in about a year and a half. So it's like meeting everybody all over again. Even classmates that I started law school with. You haven't seen them, people change. A year and a half is a long time. And so it's just very interesting to see and get to, meet everyone all over again. We have new professors on campus that we're meeting, and then also the incoming students, the new students, and last year's students who came in during the pandemic, who never had the experience of actually being on campus. And with law school, it's a very different environment. It's a lot harder. You need that in-class attention with the professor, hands-on type of environment. And so it was very hard, especially for the 2Ls that we call them, 2L year law students, who have never talked to their professors face-to-face, have never seen their classmates face-to-face, and then having to, deal with, exams in person. You have to memorize everything in law school for exams. And there's a lot to deal with, and especially after your first year. The second year, you get into more complex types of classes, such as constitutional law, federal rules of evidence, things of that nature. And so the level of what you need to be prepared for is a lot harder and a lot higher than, say, undergrad or your first year of law school. And so that has been very difficult. And then even undergrad, I've heard of friends who, especially when the pandemic first began, having to, figure out housing. And if they can't get home, where are they going to live at? I have friends who are international students. There was that whole thing where at one point international students had to go back to their country of origin. What does that look like? A lot of students that come here from out of the country, they don't have financial resources that allow them to, fly back and forth between their country and the United States, or even have the ability to, pay for room and board. A lot of them have to pay that stuff out of pocket. So there's a lot of different issues that arose throughout this whole pandemic. And even now, after us coming somewhat out of it and being back to what some may say normal, right? Not normal, it just depends.
Right. Put it in the context, though, that this discussion obviously is about mental health. And I don't want you to pour your heart out and say, oh, yeah, I'm depressed, or oh, yeah, I have stress. But put everything you just said in the context of a discussion here about mental health. Is the kind of change that you just described the kind of thing that can affect a student's mental health? I know that's maybe even a rhetorical question, but play with me here if you can.
I definitely think it does, especially if you look at it. You've had a year or more of being in isolation, especially with school. You're by yourself. You're not away from your family most of the time. Some people are lucky, stay at home and go attend school, but you're by yourself. And for me, I'm in a whole nother state. I don't have that much family here, and the family that I do have, I don't know them that well. So essentially, I'm here by myself. And so you get lonely. I know for me, I spent the better part of the pandemic in the house by myself because of my compromised immune system. And so that, prompted me to get a dog because I needed a companion. So I adopted a dog. And, now that we're coming out and at the tail end of this, being able to interact with other people and fellow students has been very, very much the highlight of coming back to campus in person. But it has been difficult. And then still the stress. I took law school traditionally almost 2 years ago when I first came to the school in 2019. Now having to, in a sense, relive my 1L year all over again with, the difficulty of the exam, having to memorize information, things of that nature, that can be very stressful as well. And for people who haven't had to deal with that to begin with, it's an added stressor because you don't know what to expect. Versus traditionally, once you get out your first year of law school, you know how the game is, you know how professors are, what professors not to take, how they test. And so that has kind of been shaken up with everything that's going on, and it adds a layer of stress that does not need to be there because law school is already stressful, but it is the reality that we're in now. And so it's kind of difficult to deal with.
Eileen Nyland, licensed mental health counselor, director of the Counseling Center at Canisius College. How typical is everything that Jean just told us?
It's hard to say, but it's hard to say because we see things, we meet with students one-on-one clinically. And I know Jean was talking about more the social part. But what I do see on campus is you talked about reacquainting yourself with people and friends, and people change. Our activities that we have, students are starving for connection, starving for activities where when we have Thursdays in the quad and we'll have food trucks, students are there. They're just starving for connection. But we talked about the normal, what's normal, what's not. And I think this is almost harder. Like we're trying to be normal, but it's not normal. And I think that's hard. I think it's hard for anyone, adults. I think it's really hard for students who are trying to have that college experience, but like, how do I ride this wave? And that can be strange. That can be, and what do you do with that? And that can affect your mental health. So
Sarah Young, Dean of Students, SUNY Buffalo State. Let me play devil's advocate. Everyone's back. It's fine now. They can mingle outside the food truck. This new normal is perfectly okay. They struggled during the pandemic, but now it's all roses and flowers, no?
No. Unfortunately, I think a lot of what Jean explained is what happens on the college campus with transition to begin with. So students normally struggle, right, when they transition, even just going away for the summer and coming back, having rules at home they don't have here, having to kind of structure their lives again, find their support network, which I think Jean was talking about a bit. And that for college students differentiates them maybe from the K through 12 group. And I think that's where this new normal is not normal. It's still not what people imagined, what they remembered, what they thought was going to happen. And it is disappointing for a lot of people. There hasn't been as much activity as they maybe perceived would occur. And, as Eileen was saying, they're starving for that connection, but they've been a year and a half away from it. And so it is always hard when you come to college to make connections with students that you've never met before, you didn't go to school with your whole life. And now you're put in this situation where, in addition, they're wearing masks. You might not recognize them on campus every time you see them because you're only seeing a third of their face. So I think that's where things have been differently structured than people hoped for. And that's led to more anxiety and a feeling of loss that people are having to deal with.
As we talk about this, I see you both, everybody kind of nodding your heads. Don't wait for me to say, and what do you think? If you've got something to add, jump on in. And Jean, I saw you shaking your head while she was talking about connectedness not being the same as it was pre-COVID.
It's not. And I know for me, being a Buffalo State grad, when I started with the EOP program. And so that summer before you start, you get a chance to, go through college courses, you get a few credits, you get to actually bond with the other students who are a part of the program. And I know I'm really close with my EOP counselor still, and I know she was telling me that it's not the same. It was done virtually these past 2 summers. You don't get that camaraderie that you used to have in terms of the EOP program. And it's just really different. And even still with like school in general and going to college, that whole, when you first leave off and go away from school, you have this idea of what it's going to be. And I know a lot of students who started school, college or law school or what have you, during the pandemic, that dream wasn't the reality. And that sometimes can be hard for students. You expect, to have this freedom, you expect, be able to make your own rules and do whatever you want to do. But then you get hit with this, you really can't. You thought you were going to stay here, but you have to go back home or figure out where else you're going to live at because, there's this virus out there and it's hard for students.
Sarah or Arlene, how predictable was any of this? Before COVID, did we have an idea that this would be the problems that we're facing?
This meaning mental health?
Well, yeah, and the issues of isolation or returning back to a campus that isn't what you thought it would be, all of that.
Who knows? And I think it's hard. The uncertainty of all this is anxiety provoking for all of us. Yet for someone who struggles with anxiety, and that's the number one reason students seek our counseling services, uncertainty is really hard to manage. So what's predictable? I have what's normal? I don't know, but this is, I think when we were chatting earlier, when last year, at many of the schools, Canisius included, we were remote and our services were remote. I think that was easier to navigate because there was a hard line. You knew how to navigate that. I'm home, teachers are online. And now we're in person. However, we've masked and we have these rules. And what do you do with that? I think the uncertainty of that is very hard to navigate. And I know this comes up all the time with students clinically is I'm just not functioning like myself. I'm not feeling like myself. And not in a dismissive way, of course, we process that, but reminding them that things aren't normal. And what is normal? May not be functioning because things aren't normal. Things are different. And I think we have to all remind ourselves of that.
Yeah, I would add to that, Dave, in terms of predictability, I don't think we could have predicted how much of an impact COVID would have, but college students in general are experiencing more and more over the last decade, over the last 20 years, mental health concerns that have demonstrated themselves in a way that's allowed us to predict some reason that we need extended mental health resources, extra, to Jean's point, like stress relievers and wellness programs that might be outside of the traditional way in which students sought mental health assistance before in the counseling center, but they're meeting in groups. We're having therapy dogs. We're doing, we have a meditation center on campus. So there was some predictability leading into this about concerns regarding mental health. And I do want to also highlight Eileen's point about loss of control. I think there's a lot of loss of control that's led to anxiety, not knowing what's happening, not having predictability, not having a structure. And then college is kind of a loss of that to begin with. So it's a double whammy for our students.
Right. I was talking to a junior the other day, and this was daunting to me. She said the only normal semester I had was first semester freshman year. Now I'm a junior and things are still not normal. I know we keep using that word. She's looking at the end of college. It's like her whole, and I remember looking forward to college and having dreams about it. And what is it? What is she left with? Now she's looking at graduation and what did I have? So there's a loss there as well. And that's why we have these services and we have all the programs on campus as well. It's hard.
I think it's interesting to hear about those kind of services because some of the things you were talking about, Sarah, to my mind are, everybody, devil's advocate here, everybody has stress. Everyone has a little bit of anxiety. When I talk about mental health, I'm talking capital M, capital H, suicide and depression and big stuff. It sounds like you're saying, deal with the little stuff and it doesn't necessarily become the big stuff? Or am I making a clinical jump that perhaps I shouldn't be making?
I think some of that, yes. And also it's a way to ease into mental health without saying, go to the counseling center. I think there's still unfortunately, some stigma attached to that for students, especially from certain areas, certain families that will feel like they don't want to do that. And so it's a way to offer it in a different venue to get the conversation started, to get people more comfortable with that idea and how it impacts them. And I think people do think, oh, everybody has stress.
Yeah.
Look at me, I'm just like everybody else. But where's the threshold? When do they know how to get help when it's not a normal amount of stress, Dave? And I think that's where we come in as people on campus who support our students and have those conversations with them.
But also, and prevention is key. And also all these wellness activities that we all do, like we have our stress less days, also works toward destigmatizing the struggle and destigmatizing mental health. We do all struggle with our mental health. Dave, you talked about the big M.
Yeah.
What is that? You know, we as human beings, part of human experience is suffering, and life is hard. And when you normalize that, it makes it more manageable. So
I definitely agree. And I also think it depends on your background and also like what stage in your education you are. Because especially in law school, we as law students understand that law school is stressful. It is just a rite of passage. It's going to be stressful. And as you progress through the years, it's going to get harder because the subject and the type of law that you're learning gets harder. But also realizing and understanding the fact that, everything is going on as a whirlwind that's going on. Everything is not stable. It's not normal. But also taking that time to recognize that you have to be grateful that you are still continuing and where you're at this moment in time. But also understanding the fact that you have to make sure you take care of you first. Mm-hmm. You find time for yourself. I know school in general can be stressful, whether it's undergrad, graduate school, what have you. Taking those time to have, self-time, me time. What is it that I need? What is it that is bothering me? Why is this bothering me? What's concerning me? And then from there, once you figure these things out, or even with the help of, the counseling center or, faculty or staff that you're close with, you can then start figuring out ways to manage those things. I know for me, I designate one day out of the week where I don't do anything school related at all. I sit on my couch and I watch TV. And that's helped me, especially going back in person to school, because it allows me to detach from everything that's going on, whether it's school, not being with my family, things of that nature. It allows me to just forget about it and, just focus on something that doesn't require me to stress or to feel angsty or anything of that nature.
Did you arrive at that on your own or somewhere along the way? Was it part of some very informal counseling or instruction?
Or formal?
It was a little bit informal. I know my first year of law school, I used to freak out because everything's going on. And an upperclassman gave me the best advice, and this is what I tell the students I bring in as an admissions counselor, is that 2 small goals a day. Don't stress yourself out about making sure you get everything that you need to get done in a day, because that's not going to be realistic. But if you set yourself 2 small goals a day and you accomplish those goals, not only do you feel like you've actually accomplished something, but there's less stress. You're not worried about everything that's going on. And then you have time in the day where you can figure out, okay, this is the time I'm going to set aside for my me time. This is the time I'm going to set aside for, working on those goals. And so that's how I came up with that whole one day. I'm going to make sure that I don't deal with anything, and I implement that into, my schedule and the 2 goal regime that I have going on now.
Yeah. Eileen, jump on in.
I think that's awesome. And I'm sitting here thinking, I'm a boomer, I'm a baby boomer. And this is what the millennial generation, I don't know if you're technically, no, you're behind. I forget.
Not a millennial. I think I'm a Gen Z.
Yeah, I get them all mixed up.
Okay.
But like I'm thinking, I grew up with pull up yourself by the bootstraps, get through. And that's why the younger folks are so awesome. Like you learn how important self-care is. And it is so important. We talk about you can only give what you have. And we teach self-care. We teach care, care for the person. It's a Jesuit term, cura personalis. And it's the college students and the younger folk. They have this. We didn't have that. I think it's just awesome.
This might be a good point then to ask what systems are there? If you're excited and pleased that they're already engaged in self-care, that doesn't negate the idea that there is a counseling center. That doesn't negate the idea that there are crisis teams that I know both of you, Sarah and Eileen, have. Give me a sense of an overview of the structure. What is there? Let's say you're not as enlightened as Jean and you need some help. What's there?
Sarah, why don't you start? Because you're
Okay, sure.
in charge.
Exactly. Sarah, jump on in.
Yeah.
So there is a care team, and most colleges do have a version of a care team. Ours is called the care team. It is a group of administrators, faculty, staff, and we work to respond to student concerns that come in. We have an online portal that students can write in, and Jean remembers from being at Buff State what that looks like. So if a faculty's had an interaction with a student in a classroom, or an RA has had an interaction with a student in a residence hall, or our dining folks who don't even, they're a vendor on campus, they know how to get to that. Maybe something's not right, a student's experiencing homelessness or food insecurity, or maybe they seemed a little off today. You've known that person for a while and they're acting a little differently, and you want something more structured to respond. Our care team will outreach via email, phone, and connect those dots for the student to what those resources are.
So
go ahead, Dave.
I don't want to cast it in any bad light, but if someone recognizes that Jean's always laughing and today for the past couple of days, he's really been different. Do they just shoot an email? I hate to use the word snitch. I don't want to put it in a bad way.
No.
But do they then inform on him and say, yo, check him out?
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
So people will, and Sean is again shaking his head because he was a student staff on campus. He was a student leader, so he knows this form well. It is a way to inform on a student, and the student will sometimes say, who outreached to you? But most of the time they know, because they've already made the initial kind of put the stone in the water. The ripple began when they asked for help or they outreach. They knew when they went there, I'm going to get more help by outreaching. And so even though they might not have acknowledged it at the time, typically they're aware, and they don't really ask about who informed us or who asked about them. And those could be anything, like I said, from food insecurity to needing emergency funding, all the way through to experiencing psychosis, and everything in between. It really is for any need a student might have.
And Eileen, same sort of thing at Canisius?
Same sort of, a little smaller, and we're highly collaborative. As a counseling center, we act as consultants because we have a confidential role. But we do the same thing. I don't think what we do, because I do sit on the team, it's our Cure Personalis team, Care for the Person. We find out who already has a relationship with that person, and that person will reach out to the student. It's probably a smaller version of what Sarah's talking about because we're a school, but it's a way to connect the dots. And it sometimes starts with a student missing class, and the faculty would put something in, or missing assignments even, because those are the first red flags to something's not right.
One of the things that I know NAMI, the National Alliance Mentally Ill, talks about is sort of the techniques that schools should have. Right before this program started, I looked at some of their materials, and they say you have to identify the students at risk, connect them to some sort of system, and then help them seek help. That sounds like exactly what the two of you just described.
Most schools have them. I mean, Sarah's more familiar as in an administrative position, but most schools have these now. And Sarah, you mentioned the history a little bit. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's, over the last 20 years, these sort of groups have erupted after school violence and things where people might have experienced, an issue like happened at Virginia Tech or in Colorado, where schools have seen, hey, you know what, if we'd have only known what that worker at the gym saw at the fitness center and the faculty member, especially at large schools, it is hard to connect the dots. So that's where these came from. And I think over the last 10 or 15 years, they really honed into a really well-oiled machine in terms of getting students the help they need.
With all of these systems out there, is there still a role for the classmate, the roommate, the someone that might not have the training or be plugged into the system? If I'm Jean's roommate and I see that he hasn't been himself, what do I say to him? What do I do?
I think just initially, I just want to say that we do get roommates reporting. And I think another piece of this generation that's different than the older generations is they recognize it more and they act more because they know how important it is. And I would say I've seen just in 5 years an increase in student-to-student reporting, not student leader, just the roommate who says, you know what, I'm going to go down to the RA and say something because I don't know what's going on here and I'm concerned. So they know enough to know they can't do anything and they can't ignore it. And that's really the first step. So I know, Sean, you had something.
Oh,
yeah,
no, it's fine.
Go on, jump on in.
I think the first step is just asking, how are you? Are you okay? What's going on? I noticed that you seem a little bit off or not off, but you seem down or what have you. And making that connection to show that you do care, that even though we're just roommates and we probably never met each other prior to coming to college or school or what have you, we do live in the same space and we have to, make sure that I guess the other is okay, especially living in that same space. And at both states, the rooms aren't that, big and elaborate. So you are not up on each other, but you guys are in a relatively close space. And so you can kind of sense when someone that you live with for a better part of the year is kind of off. And just making that initiative and extending that gap, or that bridge rather, to show that you are interested in their well-being, that you want to make sure that they're okay. And then usually they tend to open up. I know specifically as an RA or as a staff member on campus, I guess you could say, students are least likely, well, in my experience being at Buff State, aren't that likely to go to a staff person and say, oh, I'm dealing with this, I'm dealing with that, for fear of there might be, consequences or repercussions. But as a leader and a student leader, it's important to let them know that, anything that you tell me, I'm going to make sure that you're okay. I'm going to relay it to the people who are in charge or the appropriate people. And depending on what it is, a lot of times people think they're going to get expelled or going to get suspended or what have you. And a lot of times we don't care about punishing you. It's that we want to make sure that you're okay. And we want to make sure that you're successful in your educational career. And so that's the focal point that I think is very important. And then outside of that is knowing that there are organizations in the community, not just school. If you don't feel like you want to go to the administrators or faculty on your campus, there are other organizations. I'm a part of Breaking Barriers, Youth Leadership Council through Say Yes. And they offer a lot of resources and help and just have a place for you to come and talk to people. It's specifically geared towards young men of color, but it's great to be able to talk to people who they may not be the same age as you, but they have, similar experiences that are going through this with you together. And so that you can have that forum to just talk about, whatever and not be judged, not feel like you're going to be prosecuted or persecuted for it. And I think that's very nice as well.
I mean, before the program started, you mentioned that at your counseling center, you have an intake form. Mm-hmm. And I know there's a lot of things you probably can't tell me, and privacy is privacy. I get that. But when people come in, do you check off what kind of symptoms you're seeing? What is it that you're putting on that form specifically related lately to COVID?
Oh, no, that's a good question. In fact, the template we use, we do ask at intake how students have been impacted by COVID. And I did pull that out, and the biggest percentages are loneliness and isolation, missed experiences and opportunities. And also academics, of course, their academic experience has been impacted. And also, which surprised me, motivation and focus, that they reported there was a high percentage of students saying that they've been impacted. Their motivation and focus has been impacted by COVID. And what we do when we see that on an intake, we navigate that and process that with the student who's presenting. So yes, that's what's been reported by the students. Then these are students who access counseling services. And
Sarah, a similar question. Again, I want to put this entire conversation in the context of whatever normal we have post-COVID. What kind of changes have you seen in what people are reporting? Were the problems X and Y before COVID, and now they're A, B, C, and D?
I would say for my office, particularly loss, just in general loss, loss of family members, loss of control in their lives, loss of experiences. To Eileen's point, I think the loss and the feeling of how to navigate that, just having positive experiences. Even me, I feel that way. You know, for a year and a half, I didn't get to see students outside my office just hanging out. And John knows, like, my office is kind of in a hub of where people just lounge around and hang out between classes. And it was so nice this fall to just finally see students sitting, congregating, talking. And I realized, wow, I was missing that. And I don't know that I was taking stock of that myself. So I can only imagine what it's like to have missed your prom, missed your first year in college, in addition to missing your families. And then I think the significant loss that our students felt during COVID, at the height of COVID in New York State, New York City, our students were losing family members, and the trauma that was experienced there, it is still very real, and that impacted finances. It impacted their stability, homelessness. So just general loss, but it really, it takes a lot of different meanings, I guess, during COVID.
To what degree are you seeing, I'll just put it out, on a college campus, substance abuse, drug abuse, probably a factor regardless of what conversation we're having. Now, post-COVID, is it a bigger factor? Is it something you just have to keep an eye out for because it's obviously related to people's mental health? Talk a little bit about that issue. Sarah, I'll let you go first.
Sure. So we know that there was an increase in alcohol consumption during COVID-19, and I don't think that was any different for younger, college students than it was for adults. And I think also the change in the New York State marijuana policy, I mean, to be transparent, that was a big change that happened during COVID that impacted our students, that made them feel more emboldened to feel like self-soothing with marijuana wasn't a big deal. And so we do a lot of navigating conversations around what it means to utilize alcohol and other drugs to help you, quote unquote, and how students might be using that. And they think it's a positive outcome and what that might mean on the back end.
Eileen?
I really don't have an answer for that.
Okay.
Because we're not part of it's more the social part of college. And when it gets to a problematic stage is when we see students, but we don't see a lot of that.
Okay.
The judicial system, or, it's more through the judicial system.
Okay.
Maybe
Jean-Michel.
Yeah.
I know from my RA experience, there was a lot of, alcohol and other substance abuse, especially living in the student apartments. Contrast that with me now being in law school. Lawyers do, in general, use and abuse drugs and have a high rate of addiction. And to me, that starts with law school because it's so stressful. And with the added stress of being isolated, having to deal with exams and classes online, and then flipping it to now coming back in person, dealing with exams that during COVID, or being online, you could do open book. You didn't have to worry about memorizing long, rules and statutes and stuff. And now having to do that where you weren't used to that, I can definitely see that there would be an increase in using substances. But personally, has anyone come up to me or talked to me about those things? I don't know. And I tend to mind my business with that type of situation. So,
anecdotally and hypothetically, it's there.
Yes.
Okay. How do you deal? We'll go around the horn again, starting with you, Sarah. What can a college do?
I think interrupting alcohol and other drug abuse is kind of a paramount issue on college campuses, right? Because there is a positive way to interact with people and still be having one drink, right, at an event. We've all been there and maybe had that experience. And so really talking to students about seeing it in other people, recognizing when there's issues, how to engage their friends themselves about like when they know their behavior is becoming risky and not just normalizing the behavior. And I think binge drinking, obviously we can all talk about that, has become so normalized when you think about what college movies, college TV shows, that's what they see. And so for some students, it's just thinking this is how I might fit in. And so really doing a lot of preventative work. We do an alcohol and other drug prevention education week at the beginning of the first 3 weeks of classes every fall semester as a way to just engage with students a lot of prevention education. But mostly it is around alcohol and other drugs. And I think those conversations, not just happening after it occurs, although those are important too when they are in a conduct meeting. Our conduct officers are excellent at really talking to them about it, but then how we relate them back to more generalized education about alcohol and other drugs and what that looks like.
All right. I want to also ask you each a little bit about suicide. If alcohol and drug abuse is part of the stereotype, suicide is less than a stereotype. There are numbers there that show college students kill themselves.
Yes.
More often than the general population.
Yes.
How much of a change have you seen related to COVID, and has it in any way changed your approach?
I can start.
Yeah, please.
It's hard to say. I think we're still in the midst of COVID, so I don't know if I can compare, and I don't know if our numbers have been different in terms of acuity. A general sense of a higher acuity is, I do have that, we do have that. And actually suicide rates generally have dropped during 2020. Suicide rates dropped 5%, except for in some states for people of color. For people of color, they did increase. But we have a structured suicide prevention program, which we continue to do. It's called QPR. And it's QPR, and I believe they do it through the Counseling Center at Buff State too. You did it, yes. It's called Question, Persuade, and Refer. And all of the Counseling Center staff are trainers. We're certified trainers for what's called gatekeeping. And you spoke earlier, Dave, you had asked about, what about the roommate? What about the friend? Yeah. And this QPR, Question, Persuade, Refer, it's comparable to like CPR. So if you're trying to help a friend in distress, you think question, persuade, and refer. You have those letters to refer to. But
let me break that down a little bit. Question is just, hey, how are you feeling?
Well,
it can be.
Question.
Okay.
Have you been trained in? Did you?
I am trained. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. It is. Yeah. So this is many colleges and universities across the country do this. Question is asking, are you thinking about suicide? Because
okay.
Asking someone if they're thinking about suicide prevents a suicide. And that really is the crux of the program, because it's it's really scary for someone who's experiencing that. And to be able to give that person permission to say, yeah, I am, and it's really scary, that alone can prevent a suicide. So that's why training RAs, training student leaders, training students, training faculty and staff in question, persuade, and refer reduces suicidal behavior. It's pretty suicide.
All right. John, take me through the next step.
Yeah.
What does persuade look like?
Persuade is more like persuading the student to come to those additional resources, not necessarily persuading them to not commit suicide, but allowing them to know that there are different resources that are available to help them. I know as an RA, I've had a few instances where I've had students come to me or they've seemed off, and I ask them different questions, and I don't necessarily start with like, are you thinking about committing suicide, but more so, how is your day going? Is anything going on? And then I gradually get into the more directed questions relating to whether or not they want to commit suicide or are thinking about it. But it's more so just trying to get them to understand that you can relate to them and that there are other resources or people that are out there to help them through this difficult time or through these thoughts that they're having.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And Sarah, jump in on the refer part.
Sure.
Is that just a matter of, hey, call the counseling center? I know.
Yeah, I mean, it could be, in Jean's example, he's an RA, he's with a student. The counseling center is open. I'm going to call the counseling center with you. I'm going to walk you over. We talk to a lot of staff about just the empowerment of having somebody with you when you walk to the counseling center, to be with them. That can help. Or if, the counseling center is not open, they can't be there 24 hours a day. We do have great community resources. We have crisis services. It's 24 hours a day. We utilize those services a lot. We're lucky enough to have a 24-hour university police department, state police on campus, who are also trained in this and can get students help. So a lot of RRAs and staff outreach to university police. But I'm glad you've mentioned QPR, because we just actually sent it to our entire student body from me last week, asking our students to take this 30-minute course online and be trained in or brush up on your QPR training.
Awesome.
I definitely think it's very important that I think all students should get that type of training because it allows you to pick up on things that you otherwise wouldn't necessarily think about or inquire about. I know specifically in law school, there are a few students and friends that I've had to ask questions or, how are you doing? Are you thinking about committing these actions? Why? What's going on? Like, why do you feel this way? And it has helped a lot. And a lot of students, friends, people in general say that I'm easy. They can come and talk to me about these things. And so having that training, I think, will better equip students and make them feel more empowered and not think about those types of things or committing suicide, stuff like that.
In all of this, I'm not talking specifically now about suicide or drugs or stress in general. In all of this, the one person that's probably maybe real concerned is sometimes the one that is most removed. Talk about parents. And we'll start, Eileen, with you. By the time a kid's 18 and in college, to some degree, that cord has been cut. What relationship do the schools have with parents? What can the parents take away and say, hey, here's something I can use to help my kid without intruding too much? Right.
And it's hard. It's like, and I think that's the age difference again, because the umbilical cord is definitely not cut. And there's definitely a cell phone tracking to prove that. So we work with parents. My guess is, and I don't know this, Sarah, but probably a little bit more parental involvement at a private school, at like Canisius than maybe above state, but I don't know that. We have parents call and ask that express concern about their child, and we act as consultants and help them navigate that. Often we'll have a parent say, can you reach out to my son or daughter? Say, you know what? If you tell your son that we've had this conversation and you talk to the counselor at the counseling center and they're going to get an email, we'll only send it if they anticipate it coming. So you have that conversation, we'd be happy to reach out, but we won't.
Wow.
But we won't do a blind outreach. Let me ask you, Dave, if someone sent you an email and said, we think you need counseling, how likely would you be to go?
Emails are real easy to delete.
So it's the students are more receptive. We know that students are more receptive if they know where it's coming from and who's coming from. Yeah.
Sarah, chime on in.
So we actually do have a lot of parent involvement. Okay. I think a lot of what we do in the Dean of Students, because it's different than the counseling center, right? So people come to us because they think we can give them all the information, which we can't. So we do talk about FERPA, Dave, the Federal Education Privacy Rights Act, that if a student wants their parent to talk to us, then they have to sign a FERPA form, the student, not the parent. The parent will often offer to sign that form.
And is it just like, say, HIPAA? If I want my wife to know my medical stuff, I sign it away and they can talk.
Similar to that, yes, that will give information about your educational record to a parent if a student has agreed that that's who they want, maybe representing them on these conversations, or at least with them on the conversation. But to Eileen's point, I think a lot of it is just navigating the conversation with parents about, this is the time to teach your child how to advocate for themselves. And so the best thing you can do is know the resources, talk to them about them, and then let them navigate that conversation, not trying to call the principal's office and have your kid called in. It really is a change in dynamic. And I think people think, the 3 months of summer, something happens to parents and students and they just automatically can turn everything off that they've known since their child was born. And it's not the case. It's a very difficult transition. And we actually started a parent newsletter this year, and we do offer additional resources, articles that I might find that might be of interest to parents about other parents' experiences and navigating that for their child.
Okay. I also know that as an RA, there have been plenty of times where especially if they're a residential student, I've knocked on their door and said, call your mom or call your dad. They're worried. We get those calls, especially from our higher ups, or sometimes, UPD will call the duty fund and say, a parent is worried. They haven't heard from their son or daughter or child in, X amount of days. Can you just check and make sure that they're all right? Can you check and make sure that, that they know that their parents are looking for them or that they want to talk to them? And so I have done that on several occasions as well.
And make it real for me. Do they actually make the call?
That I do not know. That's up to them. But I know I have had instances where I got another call saying the student still hasn't reached out. And so I go and talk to them, what's going on? Why don't you want to talk to your parents? And kind of seeing, what other alternative ways we can get a better result out.
Yeah, and sometimes there's an issue going on, and that's why they're not calling home, right, John? They're not doing well in their classes. They've had an issue with the team they're on, and they don't want to tell their parents. So sometimes there's a real reason, and it's a good time to have a conversation with them about how they might talk to their family.
Okay.
Definitely.
There's a real automatic segue here, too. I think each of you talked a little bit about resources. And I want to look at it in two different ways. Obviously, each one of you is interested in this field. So what kind of resources do you use to keep up? What kind of things do you turn to make sure you are knowledgeable about this? And then we can get into the more basic resources like crisis services, text lines, et cetera. Eileen, let's start with you. How do you go home every night and read Psychology Today?
No.
Okay.
Sometimes I need to read something that's not related to all this after doing mental health counseling all day.
Sure.
So you don't want to know what's on my nightstand.
Okay.
But actually, I will say I was very grateful, and this is not a plug, but the 10% Happier app offered to mental health counselors a free subscription during COVID because of the work we do, and that's been a really good resource in terms of learning anxiety tools. But we have an awesome...
Let me pause and have you explain it a little more. What is that? How does it work?
It's meditation, teaches meditation and the benefits of meditation. It allows me to learn it and then teach students meditation. We do a great deal of meditation through our counseling center.
Okay.
So, but that was that was very nice of them to offer. We have listservs. I think my greatest resource in terms of staying abreast is learning from my colleagues and sharing resources. And I'm so impressed with my colleagues and so grateful for my colleagues who's very generous in sharing resources and experiences. And I got to say, that's where I learn the most is from the people that do what I do, counseling center directors and counselors at other colleges and universities.
All right, Sarah, same question. How do you keep up? Is there a magazine or a podcast you absolutely adore?
I do follow InsideHigherEd.com and the Higher Ed Chronicle because I do think you see trends and research offered through those about colleges. But I too, like Eileen, I think Facebook groups, which anybody can join now. You don't have to be approved into most of them. There's student affairs Facebook groups, higher education Facebook groups, and you do get a lot of information shared through those avenues. So you can see what's happening at other colleges and universities. Even as a parent of a student who might be thinking about sending their student off, go ahead and search on Facebook and you can see kind of what's happening at different schools at different times.
Nice.
And Jean-Michel, you're a law student. You don't have time for any of that. But if you did.
Facebook, social media. I have, the news connected to my phone. I don't have cable. But I have the news connected to my phone. So a lot of different things come across my phone, my laptop. And then being a student leader, administration gives you information that you may need to know for your specific job. I know I'm on different organizational e-boards, so different organizations outside of school and the community, they often give webinars, seminars on different, things. And especially with the legal field having such a high percentage of mental health issues for attorneys in terms of like substance abuse. My school often does, seminars and events surrounding those things so that we as students get abreast of the different resources that are available and the different issues and nuances that come with the legal profession and those potential abuses.
All right. And now the more traditional resources. Sarah, we'll start with you. Crisis services, I imagine, is top of the list.
24-hour hotline. Crisis services is great. We all love them. Yes. Eileen gave them the thumbs up. SUNY, which is the State University of New York, also has mental health resources online that I think are excellent. They have a text option for our students, text hotline 24 hours a day. So I love that for our students, and that's Googleable for anybody, SUNY Mental Health. And then recently I've learned more about New York Project Hope, which I think is a great resource. They have groups available, individual counseling, and they also have online resources. To Eileen's point, they have some meditations. You need a calm moment. They might have a 3-minute video for you. So I would also plug on New York Project Hope.
Okay. Eileen, similar question?
And what Sarah's knowledgeable about all the community resources, but I'd add to that also the crisis text line, because the students don't typically talk on the phone. So the crisis text line, 741-741, text home to that. I know we keep this information on our website as well. But also the ECM folks at ECMC are awesome, and specifically the ECMC Help Center, which can be an alternative to going to the emergency room if someone is having a mental health crisis. So the folks at ECMC, over the ECMC Help Center, have been awesome and are a wonderful resource. And they've recently extended their hours too, because there was a need.
All right. Before we wind up, I do want to make sure that, again, I'm putting all of this in the context of COVID. Not that good basic mental health information is a bad thing anyway, but I want to quickly go around the horn and get some predictions from you, especially because of COVID. We'll start with you, Sarah Young, Dean of Students, Buffalo State College. Are you optimistic?
Yes.
Why?
I think I'm always optimistic because I see students helping other students. And I think it's during this time, as I mentioned before, it's become more apparent that people will intervene when they see something wrong. And I think that should make anyone optimistic about where we're going. That yes, there may be more challenges in the area of mental health, especially has been impacted by COVID, but if your community is there to support you, will likely intervene in a better amount of time.
And similarly, as we kind of wind it here down, what one takeaway do you want the people watching to take with them?
That colleges and universities want to help you, even though we might not be able to give you specifics about your student. There's ways to give you information. It's out there. It's on the web. We're here to help. Please contact us if you are concerned about any student. Make sure that you are connecting with the people who are there to assist your student when you cannot be.
All right. Sarah Young is the Dean of Students at what they now call SUNY Buffalo State. But to me, it's always going to be Buffalo State College, and I'm sorry for it. Eileen Nyland over at Canisius College. It's always been called Canisius College.
Yes.
Are you optimistic?
Optimistic. Generally, or?
Well, in relation to this.
Am I optimistic? I don't know. I know I'm uncertain. What I try to look at, and we work with students, is looking at the gifts of the pandemic. And there are some good things that are coming out of this, not only cultural changes like telecounseling, things like that. But I think this is an opportunity to reevaluate and to simplify and to get down to basic values personally and as a community. So, am I optimistic? Generally, I'm optimistic.
It does not have to be a Disney ending. This is a good answer.
I'm uncertain, and and that makes me nervous because we're used to having the answers, and we're used to knowing how things are going to go. We don't know where this thing is going, and I think that's hard for us as a culture, and I think it's hard for college students. The uncertainty of that is unnerving. So, learning to stay present and deal with what we have today, because tomorrow it's going to change, is a good motto, I think.
All right, and the number one takeaway then for people who are part of this discussion tonight, what do you want to leave them with?
Be gentle with yourself, because just be gentle with yourself and take care of yourself and take care of each other. That's it.
Wow, that's great. Jean-Michel, you've got the last word. Same question. Are you in Sarah's happy land or Eileen's bleakness? I don't mean to pick on you both. Seriously, I thought that was a great answer, because people will sometimes just say, "Oh yeah, it's great," and you were very honest there. So I don't mean to pick on you. Jean-Michel, are you optimistic?
I'm going to give you the most lawyerly answer ever, and it depends. It depends on everyone's individualized circumstances. I'm going to take off my law student hat and put on my, typical undergraduate student hat. As an undergraduate student, I would be more optimistic. I would say that students, like we've talked about, are more eager to, talk to each other, right, express how they are feeling, to collaborate, to, just be around other people. Mm-hmm. As a law student, I would say I'm not so optimistic, and that is because of looking at it in a legal context. A lot of legislation has been passing around in the different states regarding, mask mandates, quarantine mandates, different things of that nature. Mm-hmm. And it gets uneasy because, as we know, this is a real thing. This can be deadly. And not knowing how different states are going to handle different things, and when, a mass outbreak occurs, or, at schools when a student, tests positive for COVID. It's just so uncertain. And so I really think it depends on, a person's particularized circumstance, whether or not you can be optimistic or not.
All right. And what is your takeaway for the audience?
That it's okay to express your feelings. It's okay to not be okay. And that there are people here to help you that aren't going to judge you, that aren't going to, talk behind your back or anything of that nature. And, Sarah has been my buddy for the longest. So there's always going to be someone there for you. Don't think that you're by yourself or alone.
All right. Tremendous stuff. All three of you. Jean-Michel Jr., a second-year law student, third-year law student?
Third year, yeah.
Waiting for May, he says, at Barry University in Florida. Before that, he worked with Sarah Young at SUNY Buffalo State. Sarah Young, Buffalo State College, Dean of Students, also head of the care team there. And Eileen Nyland at Canisius College, licensed mental health counselor and director of the Counseling Center at Canisius. You three have been wonderful. Thank you all for doing this.
Thank you.
Before we go, there's a couple other thank yous I have to get in here. Obviously, the Mental Health Initiative at WBFO has support from the Patrick P. Lee Foundation. Tonight, we've had all sorts of technical support behind the scenes. This is not just a basic Zoom. We've got Aaron Heverin and Matt Sanfilippo on board. Our Director of Education and Outreach is Beth Frankowiak. Samantha Kittinger is our outreach specialist. And before we wind all this up, I do want to thank you. Thank you, the viewer, for sharing this, for maybe going back and looking at the one we did last week or the week before that. If you'd like more information, you can go to WBFO.org, click on the top of our page for the Mental Health Initiative. On your own time, you can watch the past 3 weeks of videos and learn a lot more about this topic. Either way, it's a good thing that you were here for us, and we're glad that we could be here for you. I'm Dave Debo, News Director at WBFO. Thank you and have a great evening.